The black horizon drifted through the silent reaches of space, a ghost ship in the vast emptiness. The crew was just beginning to settle into their routines, having completed their initial survey of a nearby nebula, when the faint signal came through. It was barely a whisper, something almost impossible to detect, unless you knew exactly where to listen. A distress signal, weak and scattered, but still carrying a sense of urgency. It was coming from a dead star system, one thought to be devoid of any life or civilization. Captain Mara Kael stood in the command center, staring at the data flickering on the screen in front of her. The star in question had long since burned out, leaving behind only a cold, lifeless husk. The station's coordinates were located on the edge of the system, far from any known charted paths. It shouldn't have been there. There shouldn't have been anyone there. But the signal was real. Her hand hovered over the control panel. Her decision was automatic. This was what they were here for, after all. Routine mission, routine search, nothing to fear. Set course for the coordinates, she ordered, her voice steady, though something in her chest stirred. As the ship changed course, the crew began to take notice of the anomaly. The comms system, usually a reliable tool for communication, had begun to glitch. Static flooded the channels, turning the quiet hum of the black horizon into something unsettling. At first, the whispers were soft, like the wind rushing through cracks in an old building. Just noise. But as the hours passed, they grew louder. Did anyone else hear that? Lieutenant Benson's voice crackled through the comms. His tone was tight, his voice betraying a hint of unease. Kael didn't respond immediately. She had heard it too. The whispers weren't just static. They sounded familiar. Her name, her personal details, as though someone or something was trying to reach her through the ship's system. It's probably just a glitch, she muttered to herself, trying to push the worry from her mind. Focus on the mission. The black horizon drifted closer to the station, a massive structure of metal and ancient machinery, hanging like a dark shadow against the backdrop of the cold, starless void. It had a design that was unfamiliar, a hybrid of technology that appeared far older than anything human hands had ever built. The station was silent, its lights dimmed, no signs of life or movement. But still, the signal persisted. They docked. The air was heavy as Kael led the crew through the airlock, stepping into the station with her boots echoing in the emptiness. The place was abandoned, long since forgotten, but the faint hum of machinery told them that it had once been alive, operational, perhaps even thriving. Now it was just a shell, a place left behind, lost to time. "We should get back to the ship," Benson said, his voice filled with doubt. "Something's wrong here, Captain. I don't like this." But Kael shook her head, dismissing his concern. "We came all this way. We're not leaving without answers." She motioned for the crew to continue forward. As they explored the station, the whispers grew louder, more distinct. They could hear their own names now, repeated in voices that sounded nothing like their own. But there was something about the voices, something that chilled them all to the bone. These were personal details, things only they knew. Who had said those things? Who was broadcasting them? "I think we're not alone," Lieutenant Benson muttered, his eyes wide, scanning the empty corridors. "This place, it feels wrong." Captain Kael stopped, feeling a sudden shiver crawl down her spine. It wasn't just the station that felt off. It was the air, the silence, the way the walls seemed to hum, like they were alive. And then the whispers changed. "Captain." The voice was soft, barely audible over the static, but it was unmistakable. Her own name. Kael froze in her tracks, her heart skipping a beat. The voice, it was hers, but it wasn't coming from her. It came from the comm system, from the walls. It surrounded her, filled the air, like a breath she couldn't escape. "Captain Kael," the voice repeated. It was now a clear command, not a whisper. "Stop this," Kael snapped, her voice strained, but the voice only grew louder, insistent. "It's already inside." The words seemed to freeze the blood in her veins. The voice, the tone, was unmistakably hers, but it wasn't her. The whispers, once distant and strange, now took on a terrifying new meaning. Something was on the ship. Something had followed them here. "We need to get back to the Black Horizon," Kael ordered, her voice more forceful now. She could feel the grip of fear tightening around her. Something was wrong. Something was very wrong. As they made their way back to the docking bay, the whispers grew more frantic. The voice was becoming louder, more. The Black Horizon was silent as it drifted back toward the abandoned station, its hull reflecting the distant light of the dead star. Captain Mara Kael stood at the helm, her fingers trembling slightly as she gripped the controls. Her mind wasn't entirely on the ship or the mission. It was on the whispers, the voices she couldn't shake. No matter how she tried to ignore them, they still echoed in her mind. The station loomed before them, its shape dark and foreboding, a relic from a forgotten age. As they docked, the crew began to disembark, each of them walking with a sense of unease. The last time they had encountered something like this had been a nightmare, but this place felt different. There was a weight to it, something pressing down on their very souls. Mara led the crew down the station's long, dimly lit corridors, the air cold and stale. The walls were adorned with strange markings, symbols that seemed to pulse faintly, like they were alive. There was something unsettling about them, as though they were designed to keep something in, or keep something out. Some of the markings appeared to have been scratched into the walls, hastily, as if someone or something had tried to escape. "Mara, do you see this?" Dr. Ryan asked from behind her, his voice shaky. His eyes were wide as he studied the markings closely. "This looks like it was done in desperation." Mara didn't respond. She couldn't bring herself to say anything. The sight of the markings stirred something deep inside her, something buried long ago. The memories of her lost partner, Leela, began to surface. Leela had been everything to Mara. Her partner, her confidant, her love. Their mission had been a routine one, a simple exploration on the edge of space. But something had gone horribly wrong. The distress call they had received had been a trap, and Leela had paid the price for it. Mara shut her eyes tightly, trying to block out the memories. She couldn't think about that now. Not here. Not with this station. "We should be careful," Ryan continued, his voice tinged with fear. "Something is not right here. The way these markings look, like someone was trying to escape, it's as though this place was a prison." Mara forced her mind back to the present. "Stay focused," she ordered, her voice sharp. She took a step forward, her boots echoing in the silence. The crew moved deeper into the station, their footsteps slow, hesitant. Each turn brought them to another dark corridor, another abandoned room, each one more unsettling than the last. The station had once been a hub of activity, but now it was only a shell. The walls were lined with cracked glass and rusted machinery, a once proud facility left to rot in the void. Suddenly, a voice whispered through the comm system. At first, it was barely audible, just a rustle of static. But then it became clearer, more distinct. It was calling their names, one by one, each of them hearing their name in a voice that didn't belong to anyone they knew. Did anyone else hear that? Lieutenant Benson's voice crackled over the comms, his tone trembling. "I heard it," Ryan said, his voice calm but filled with dread. "It's like the station is talking to us." Mara stopped in her tracks, her heart pounding in her chest. The whispering voices, each one familiar, yet somehow alien, filled her mind, telling her things she didn't want to hear. They were digging into her memories, dredging up the darkest corners of her soul. The pain of Leela's loss hit her like a wave, choking her. She had never been able to move on, never truly let go. The mission, the accident, Layla's death, it had all happened so quickly. And now, this station, this place, was pulling those memories out of her, twisting them, making them hurt all over again. "You think she's dead, don't you, Mara?" the voice said. "You think you're the only one who survived. But what if she's still here? What if she's waiting for you? Mara's breath caught in her throat, and she froze. She felt the walls closing in around her, the air growing thick, heavy. The whispers were not just in her ears. They were in her mind. They were memories, thoughts, things that only she knew. They were her own doubts and fears, but twisted and amplified by something inside the station. "We need to leave now," Benson said, his voice desperate. "This place is messing with our heads." But Mara couldn't leave. She couldn't abandon the mission, couldn't leave the station without answers. She had to know the truth about Leela. Was she really gone, or was there something more to the story? Something more to this place? "Captain." Ryan's voice was softer now, almost reverent. "I think I know what's going on here. This station, it's not just broadcasting a signal. It's broadcasting psychic energy." Mara turned to face him, her mind racing. "Psychic energy," she repeated, her voice hoarse. "What are you talking about?" "The voices," Ryan said, his eyes wide. "They're not just radio waves. They're pulling from our minds. This station, it's like a conduit, feeding off our fears, our memories. It's manipulating us." Mara's stomach twisted. It made sense, too much sense. The way the station had felt from the moment they arrived. The way it seemed to know them, to understand their deepest fears. It wasn't just a malfunction. It was something alive, something malevolent. "We need to destroy this place," Ryan continued, his voice shaky. "We need to get back to the black horizon and leave." But Mara couldn't. She wouldn't. She had to find out what happened to Leela, had to know the truth, even if it meant facing whatever horror lay inside the station. "Stay focused," Mara said, her voice firm, but tinged with uncertainty. She moved forward again, her footsteps echoing in the empty hall. The whispers became louder, more insistent, as if the station itself was alive, feeding on their fears. The walls seemed to pulse, and Mara could feel the eyes of the station on her, watching her every move. As they entered another chamber, the voice came again, this time clearer than before. It wasn't just a whisper anymore. It was a statement, a revelation. Mara, she wasn't killed. She was taken. Mara's heart stopped. Her mind went blank. The words hung in the air, repeating over and over, echoing in her head. She wasn't killed. She was taken. The truth. The terrible, impossible truth. Leela hadn't died in the mission. She had been taken by whatever force had claimed this station. Whatever entity was manipulating them, twisting their minds, had taken her. And now Mara was going to have to face it. The crew stared at her, eyes wide with shock and disbelief. They had all heard the voice. They had all heard the truth. Mara's hands trembled as she reached for the comm system. "Get back to the black horizon." "Now," she ordered, her voice cold and determined. She didn't care about the station anymore. She didn't care about anything but finding Leela, wherever she was, and getting her back. But as they turned to leave, the voice echoed one final time, soft but unmistakable. "Mara, we're already inside." The deeper they went into the station, the more it felt like it wasn't a station at all. It was alive. There was no mistaking it now. The walls were no longer just cold, metallic surfaces. They seemed to breathe, to pulse with an ancient energy, as if the very structure of the place was alive, aware, and watching them. Captain Mara Kael led the crew through the twisting corridors, her boots echoing in the eerie silence. The whispers had grown louder since they first stepped inside, and now they weren't just coming through the comms. They were all around them, seeping into their minds, invading their thoughts. The voices told them things they didn't want to hear. Secrets, fears, regrets. Mara tried to focus on the mission. She had to find the source of the voices. She had to find out what happened to Leela. But the more they explored, the more the station seemed to change, shifting around them like it had a mind of its own. They reached the heart of the station, a vast, cavernous space where the walls seemed to swirl with dark, shifting patterns. It was unlike anything they had seen before. The air was thick, almost suffocating, and the whispers were louder now, overlapping, all speaking at once. "Is this it?" Ryan's voice cracked, his eyes wide with fear. "What is this place?" "It's not a station," Mara said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's a ship. An alien ship." They looked around at the strange organic structures that seemed to grow out of the walls, twisting like vines. The entire room seemed to be pulsing with an eerie energy. The floor was slick, as though coated in a thin layer of some unknown substance. It felt wrong, unnatural. Juno, one of the crew members, stumbled forward, her hand pressed to her head. I can't think. It's all too much." Mara turned to her, concerned. "Juno, what's wrong?" But Juno didn't respond. She was staring at something invisible, yet there. Her eyes were wide, and her lips trembled. "No, please, no," she whispered, her voice distant. It's her, my sister." The others gathered around her, but Juno didn't seem to notice. Her hands were trembling, her eyes fixed on something that only she could see. Mara stepped closer, her heart racing. She had seen this before, this look in Juno's eyes. It was the same look someone got when they were haunted by something. Someone lost. "Juno," Mara said gently, "what are you seeing?" "She's calling me," Juno said, her voice cracking. "She's begging me to help her." Mara's stomach churned. Juno's sister had died years ago, in a failed experiment. Juno had been responsible. She had been the one to conduct the experiment that had gone horribly wrong, and her sister had paid the price. Juno had carried that guilt with her, deep in her heart, ever since. The whispers grew louder. They weren't just speaking to Juno anymore. They were speaking to everyone. The voices echoed in their minds, digging into their fears, their regrets. "Mara," Ryan said, his voice trembling. "It's like it's feeding off our guilt, our pain. It's using our memories against us." Mara didn't respond. She couldn't. The voice, the one calling to Juno, was now calling to her. She heard Leela's voice, faint at first, then clearer, as though it was coming from the very walls of the ship. "Mara, come to me. I'm here. I'm waiting." The words sent a chill down Mara's spine. She gripped her comms unit tightly, trying to focus. But it was too much. The pain, the memories, the guilt. I have to go," Juno whispered, her voice hollow. "She needs me." Mara grabbed her arm before she could move. "Juno, listen to me. This station, whatever it is, it's trying to manipulate us. It's using our memories, our fears. Don't listen to it. Please." But Juno's eyes were glazed, distant, as though she was no longer there. She pulled away from Mara's grip, moving toward the center of the room, where the ship's core seemed to pulse with a dark, unholy light. Her voice came again, but this time it was distorted, almost mechanical. "I'm so sorry, Juno. I never meant for you to die. Please forgive me." "I didn't mean it," Juno whispered, tears streaming down her face. Mara's heart ached for her. Juno had been carrying that guilt for years, and now it seemed like the station was using it against her. The whispers were twisting her memories, forcing her to relive her worst fears. "We need to get out of here," Ryan said, his voice panicked. "This place is messing with our heads. We can't fight it." But Mara couldn't leave. Not now. Not when she was so close to the truth. The truth about Layla. About what happened to her. Leela's voice called to her again, louder this time. "Mara, come to me. I need you. I'm here. Come and find me." The words were so real, so vivid. It was like Layla was standing right beside her, whispering in her ear. The pain of losing her flooded Mara's chest, and she nearly broke down. But she couldn't. She had to stay strong. She had to focus. "Stay with me, Juno," Mara said, her voice firm. "We can't let it win. We can't let it take us." But Juno didn't hear her. She was already moving toward the center of the room, her eyes wide and unseeing. The other crew members tried to stop her, but it was too late. She was already too far gone. "Mara," Ryan said quietly, his voice filled with dread. "It's not just messing with us. It's feeding off us. It's using our guilt, our pain, to control us." Mara's hands shook as she watched Juno move closer to the ship's core. The whispers were getting louder, more urgent. The voices of the crew were fading, drowned out by the relentless call of the station. And then, in a final moment of clarity, Mara heard Layla's voice again. "Mara, come to me. It's already inside." The words hit her like a physical blow. Her heart stopped for a moment, and then the air around her seemed to thrum with a strange energy. The voices stopped. The silence was deafening. Mara froze. The ship had fallen silent. The whispers, the voices, the pain, they were all gone. But then Mara heard it, Lila's voice, clear as day, calling her name. She looked up, and her blood ran cold. At the center of the room, in the heart of the station, a shadowy figure emerged from the darkness. It was Leela, or at least it looked like her. "Mara," the figure whispered, a cold smile playing on its lips. "I've been waiting for you." And just like that, Mara knew that the truth she had been searching for was not what she expected. It wasn't the closure she needed. It was the beginning of something far worse. The ship, the station, the entity that inhabited it, was waiting for them all. The ship's systems had begun to fail in ways that defied logic. Doors that had opened for years now refused to budge. Gravity shifted erratically, throwing crew members off balance, and lights flickered, casting eerie shadows along the walls. It wasn't just the environment. It felt like the very ship itself had turned against them, as though it was alive and responding to their fear. Captain Mara Kael stood in the command center, her hands gripping the edge of the console as she tried to steady herself. The hum of the ship had become a low, ominous growl, almost like a heartbeat. It wasn't normal. None of it was. And the whispers, those whispers, they had never stopped. They echoed in her mind, growing louder with each passing hour. "You're imagining it," Dr. Ryan said, his voice shaky. He was standing near a malfunctioning terminal, his hands flying over the controls in an attempt to restore order. "These voices, they're just hallucinations. The stress of this place is messing with our heads." Mara glanced at him, but she didn't respond. She couldn't. Part of her wanted to believe him, wanted to think this was all just a product of their collective stress. But deep down, she knew something worse was happening. Something far more dangerous. The lights flickered again, and the ship seemed to groan, its walls shifting as if trying to close in on them. Mara's mind raced. This wasn't just a malfunction. The ship itself seemed to be alive, responding to the presence of the crew. "Listen to me," she said, her voice steady but filled with urgency. "This isn't just a broken ship. It's a trap. The station, it's feeding off us. It's manipulating us, using our minds against us." Rain looked at her, his face pale. "Manipulating us? Mara, this is insane." Mara didn't have time to argue. The whispers had become more distinct. They weren't just random words now. They were coherent, personal. They spoke directly to each of them, bringing their worst fears to life. Juno, her face pale and drawn, suddenly broke down, clutching her head in agony. "No, stop it, please. Not again. Don't make me relive it." Mara rushed to her side, kneeling down. "Juno, what's happening?" It's my sister," Juno gasped. "She's here. She won't leave me alone." The others gathered around, their faces a mix of confusion and fear. They had all experienced the whispers, but Juno seemed to be the most affected, perhaps because of the guilt she carried over her sister's death. The ship, whatever it was, seemed to be preying on her pain. "It's not real, Juno," Mara said gently, her voice firm. "It's the ship. It's trying to manipulate you. We need to stay strong. We need to keep our minds clear." But Juno was beyond hearing her. Her eyes were glazed, her body trembling as if under some unseen force. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I should have saved you. I didn't mean to. I didn't mean to let you die." Mara's heart ached for Juno, but there was no time for sympathy. The ship's grip on them was tightening, and she could feel it too. The voices were getting louder, more insistent. It was like the walls were closing in on them, and every word that echoed in her mind felt like a weight on her chest. Mara closed her eyes, trying to push away the intrusive thoughts. But as she did, the memories came rushing back. The mission, the disaster, the choice she had made. She had been there, standing beside her partner, Leela, as the enemy closed in. Leela had begged her to help, to pull her from the wreckage. But Mara had made a decision. The crew had been in danger. If she didn't leave Leela behind, they would all perish. Mara had chosen to save the crew. The memory hit her like a punch to the stomach. She had never truly faced it. She had always told herself that she had no choice, that it was a matter of survival. But now, here in this place, the truth was undeniable. She had abandoned Leela. She had chosen to leave her behind. The whispers grew louder. She could feel them digging into her mind, digging into that decision, forcing her to confront the guilt she had buried for so long. The ship was using it, using her guilt, her pain, and it wasn't stopping. "Mara," a voice whispered, soft and haunting. Her breath caught in her throat. The voice was familiar, so familiar. It was Leela's voice. "No," Mara whispered to herself, shaking her head. "No, this is just the ship. It's not real." But the voice didn't stop. It continued to call to her, growing louder with each passing second. "Mara," it repeated, now a desperate plea. "You left me. You chose them over me. You let me die." The words hit her like a storm. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The guilt consumed her, twisting her insides. She had made the choice. She had chosen to leave her partner to die. "Stop it," she whispered, clutching her head, trying to block out the voice. But it only grew louder. "Leave them behind. They're not important. I was the one you should have saved. I'm the one you abandoned." Mara's knees gave way, and she sank to the floor. Her mind was spinning. The memories, the guilt, the whispers, it was all too much. "Captain, you have to snap out of it," Ryan shouted, shaking her by the shoulders. Mara blinked, struggling to clear her mind. She had to stay focused. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. The ship was using her guilt against her, manipulating her memories to break her down. But before she could speak, the voice of her partner came again. It was different now. It wasn't just a whisper. It was right in front of her, echoing in her ears. "You'll never escape me, Mara," the voice said, clear as day. Mara froze. She looked up, her breath catching in her throat. There, standing in front of her, was Leela, her partner, or what looked like her. The figure stood in the shadows, a twisted, almost monstrous version of Leela. It wasn't Lila. It couldn't be. But the voice, her voice, it was unmistakable. "No," Mara whispered, shaking her head. "This is the ship. This is all part of its control." But the figure took a step forward, its eyes burning with accusation. "You'll never escape me, Mara," it repeated. "You chose them over me. Now you'll suffer for it." The figure began to fade into the darkness of the ship's core, leaving Mara breathless, paralyzed with guilt. She couldn't escape it. She couldn't escape the truth. And in that moment, Mara knew there was no escaping the ship, no escaping the truth. The entity controlling it had found its weapon, and it was using her own guilt to break her down, to break them all. The tension on the black horizon was palpable, like an electric charge in the air. Crew members who once worked together, relied on each other, now cast nervous glances and spoke in short, uneasy phrases. It wasn't the malfunctioning systems or the strange voices that had pushed them to the edge. It was something far more dangerous. It was the fear, the doubt, the voices that now seemed to drive them apart. Mara Kael stood in the command center, trying to focus on the mission, but the nagging voices in her head grew louder. They weren't just whispers now. They were commands, orders, suggestions of unspeakable acts, things she would never consider in her right mind. But this was the ship. This was the station. They had all been drawn into its web. She glanced over at Dr. Ryan, who was hunched over a terminal, his face tight with concentration. He had been obsessively trying to pinpoint the source of the psychic disturbance. His eyes were red, his movements jerky, as if his mind were somewhere else entirely. The strain was beginning to show on him too. "Mara," he said, his voice strained. "The energy core, it's amplifying the psychic signal. That's why we're all hearing these voices, why they're becoming stronger. The core itself is feeding the entity's power." Mara looked at him, feeling a heavy weight in her chest. She had known it, had felt it in her bones. The ship, or whatever it was feeding on their fear, their confusion. But there was no time to deal with that now. There was only one thing that mattered: survival. "Can we stop it?" she asked, her voice tight. He shook his head. "I don't know. But if we can't shut down the core, it's going to continue getting worse. The voices, they'll control us." Before Mara could respond, the ship groaned and the lights flickered again. Her head spun, the voices suddenly clearer, more distinct, echoing in her mind like 1,000 screaming souls. The whispers began again, but this time they weren't in her head alone. She could hear them in the walls, in the floor, in the air itself. They surrounded her, drowned her. The voices called to her by name, each one distinct, each one begging for something. Something Mara couldn't quite understand. "You failed us, Mara," one voice hissed. It was soft, almost seductive. "You're the reason we're here. You're the reason it's all falling apart. You will pay for what you did," another voice snarled. It was low and guttural, filled with hate. "All of you. You'll all pay." The voices seemed to blend together, creating a cacophony that rattled her very soul. She couldn't think. She couldn't focus. Her chest tightened, and her vision blurred. The walls of the ship seemed to close in on her, the shadows pressing against her skin like an invisible force. She reached out, steadying herself against the console. Her breath was shallow, her mind clouded with the pressure of the voices. "Captain, Captain." Ryan's voice broke through the noise, pulling her back to reality. She turned to him, but for a moment, her eyes locked onto the reflection in the nearby console. It wasn't her reflection. It was another version of herself, wearing a different uniform, standing with a different crew. Her heart skipped a beat, and she blinked, her mind racing to process what she had just seen. She looked again. The reflection was gone, but the feeling lingered. It felt real. It felt like something more than a trick of the light. "Mara." Ryan's voice sounded distant now, as though he were miles away. She turned to him, but her vision wavered. The faces around her began to blur, melting into other faces, other uniforms. She saw herself, over and over, in different timelines, different lives. Sometimes she was a soldier, sometimes a scientist, sometimes a leader, always with different people, different friends, different enemies. Each version of herself was different, but they all had one thing in common. They all wore a haunted expression, as if they were all carrying the weight of a terrible decision. "No," she whispered to herself. "This is not real. This is the ship. This is the station." But the more she tried to push the images away, the stronger they became. She saw her younger self, arguing with her mentor in the dimly lit corridors of a long-forgotten ship. The memory felt sharp, too sharp, as though it had just happened yesterday. "Space is a trap, Mara," her mentor had warned, his voice full of concern. "Out here, the mind is more fragile than you think. The isolation, the darkness, it gets to you. It'll make you question everything, even your own mind. You have to be careful. You have to stay grounded." Mara had dismissed him at the time. She had always thought of herself as strong. She believed that nothing could shake her, that nothing could break her resolve. But here, now on this cursed ship, she realized how wrong she had been. The space her mentor had warned her about wasn't just the void between stars. It was the void in the mind, the emptiness that could swallow everything you thought you knew about yourself. "I didn't listen," Mara whispered, her eyes closing as the weight of the memory crushed her chest. "I never listened." "Mara." Ryan's voice snapped her out of the flashback. He was right in front of her now, his hands shaking as he tried to pull her away from the console. "Mara, we need to get out of here. The core is starting to activate. The voices, they're getting louder. We can't let it take control." The voices were indeed getting louder. She could hear them, all of them, chanting her name over and over again. They filled her ears, deafening her, pressing against her skull as though they were trying to tear her apart from the inside. "Mara," the voices whispered, 1,000 voices joined together in a single, unified cry. "Mara, Mara, Mara." It was unbearable. The sound of her name became a roar, a constant, rhythmic pounding inside her head. She clutched her ears, falling to her knees, her body trembling with the intensity of it. And then, as quickly as it had started, the voices stopped. But the silence was even worse. It was heavy. It was suffocating. "Mara," a voice said, and this time, it wasn't from the ship. It was real. It was hers. She looked up, her eyes wide with shock. There, standing before her, was another version of herself. This one was calm, serene, as if unaffected by the madness around them. Her reflection smiled faintly, but it wasn't a smile of reassurance. It was a smile of knowing. A smile that said everything was lost. "You can never escape, Mara," the reflection whispered. "The voices, they will always be with you. The core will always control you." Mara opened her mouth to speak, but the words caught in her throat. There was no escaping. There was no way out. And in that moment, she realized the truth. She was already lost. The ship had won. Mara and the remaining crew stood in the darkened control room, the air thick with the weight of their exhaustion and the haunting presence of the ship. The station had been quiet for a while now, the voices falling into an eerie silence, but it only made the tension more unbearable. It felt like the calm before a storm. The oppressive silence was almost more frightening than the whispers had ever been. Dr. Ryan, the only one still actively searching for answers, had found something that might finally shed light on the twisted history of the place. He had uncovered a final log, left by the station's last survivors. Their voices, distorted and filled with madness, played over the comms, barely audible beneath the static. Mara listened intently, her heart hammering in her chest. The words, though broken and fragmented, painted a chilling picture. The survivors had been driven mad by the voices, their minds shattered and twisted by the station's influence. The log described their slow descent into insanity, each entry more desperate than the last, until there was nothing left but incoherent rambling. But it wasn't just the survivors' madness that caught Mara's attention. It was the final words, barely discernible through the static. "The ship, it feeds on us. Our guilt, our pain, our regrets. It's alive. It wants us to stay. Forever." Mara felt a cold chill run down her spine. She looked at Dr. Ryan, who had grown pale, his fingers trembling as he typed away at the terminal. He seemed to be piecing something together, something important. He looked up at her, his face a mixture of fear and understanding. "It's not just a ship, Mara," he said, his voice tight. "It's a weapon. An ancient race created it, one that used sound, thought, and emotion to control other species. The station was designed to amplify their psychic energy, to turn entire civilizations into slaves. It's a psychic vessel, Mara, and it's feeding on us." Mara took a step back, her mind racing to process what he had said. A weapon, a tool of control. She could feel her stomach twist with dread. Everything that had happened, the whispers, the visions, the voices, made sense now, but the implications were far more terrifying than she had ever imagined. The voices, Dr. Ryan continued, his voice growing more strained. They're not just random. They're carefully chosen, tailored to us. The ship is digging into our deepest fears, our regrets, our emotions. It's using them to break us down, to make us weak, to control us. Mara's mind swirled with his words, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she was missing something. Something crucial. She thought about the whispers that had haunted her since the moment they entered the station, how they had always been so personal, so invasive. It was more than just noise. It was an attack, a direct assault on her mind. Suddenly, the room felt colder, darker. The air seemed to thicken, pressing in on her. She closed her eyes, trying to steady herself. But the voices returned, fainter at first, like a distant murmur, but quickly growing louder. They were calling her name. Mara. The voice was soft, almost tender, but it carried with it a sense of overwhelming sadness. It was familiar, one she hadn't heard in years. Her eyes snapped open, her breath catching in her throat. It was her partner's voice, Adrian, the one she had left behind on that disastrous mission, the one who had died, or so she had believed. But now, hearing her name on his lips, her heart broke all over again. Adrian, she whispered, her voice trembling. The voice continued, but it wasn't just Adrian anymore. It was a chorus of voices, each one familiar, each one from her past. Her mother, her father, her childhood friends, each one speaking to her, reaching out to her with words of love, regret, pain. It was overwhelming, suffocating. She could feel the tears welling in her eyes, but she blinked them away, refusing to give in to the crushing weight of the emotions flooding through her. The ship was doing this. The station was using their deepest regrets, their greatest fears to break them, to twist them into something they weren't. "Stop," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Please, stop." But the voices didn't stop. They only grew louder. The room seemed to close in on her, the walls pulsating with the rhythm of the voices. The sound was unbearable. She stumbled back, clutching her head in her hands, trying to block out the noise, but it was impossible. The voices surrounded her, inside her head, inside her soul. Dr. Ryan was at her side now, pulling her to her feet, his face filled with desperation. "Mara, you have to fight it. You have to focus. It's the station. The energy core. It's feeding on us. On our pain." But Mara couldn't hear him anymore. The voices were too loud, too powerful. She closed her eyes, trying to block everything out. And then, as though she had suddenly stepped into another world, the voices began to fade, slowly at first, then all at once. Silence. But it wasn't a comforting silence. It was hollow, empty, as though the very air itself had been sucked away. She opened her eyes, her chest tight with fear. And then, from the silence, came a single, unified voice. "Welcome home, Mara." The words sent a jolt of terror through her. It wasn't just the voice of her partner, or her family, or the crew. It was all of them, fused together, as if the station itself had become one with her mind. The entity behind the voices was speaking through her, using her own guilt and pain to welcome her back to a place she had never truly left. Mara's breath caught in her throat as the realization hit her with full force. The station wasn't just drawing them in to feed on their emotions. It was using their deepest fears and regrets to break them, to make them part of it, to make them stay forever. She turned to Dr. Ryan, her face pale with horror. "We have to leave. Now." But even as she spoke, she knew it was already too late. The station had already claimed them. And with that thought, the lights flickered one last time, casting everything into darkness. The black horizon shuddered, its metal frame groaning under the weight of its own existence. The ship had become a living nightmare, every corridor warped and twisted by the power of the station's core. Mara Kael, and the remaining crew raced through the darkened halls, their steps echoing in the silence, their hearts pounding with the urgency of the moment. The voices had grown louder. Every step they took was a battle against the growing weight of their fears, their guilt, and their regrets. The ship itself seemed to be alive, the walls shifting as though they were breathing, the floor tilting beneath their feet. The lights flickered erratically, casting eerie shadows that danced and twisted, as though mocking them. Mara could feel the pull, the constant tugging at the edges of her mind. It was as if the voices had become a part of her, a living, breathing thing that wanted nothing more than to consume her completely. She could hear them clearly now, their whispers pressing into her consciousness, drowning out her thoughts. "You can't escape, Mara," one voice whispered, soft and chilling. "You're already here. There's no way out." Her breath caught in her throat. It was her partner's voice, Adrian's voice, taunting her from the depths of her own mind. She wanted to scream, to shut it all out, but she knew it was futile. The ship had already claimed them all, and the only way out was through the core. "Captain, we need to move." Dr. Ryan's voice broke through the haze, his face pale and determined. He was the only one still holding on, still trying to fight against the crushing weight of the station's power. Mara nodded, her mind a whirlwind of thoughts, but she couldn't focus. The final decision was closing in on her, and it felt like the weight of the entire universe was resting on her shoulders. The crew moved quickly through the dark halls, navigating the labyrinth of the station's ship-like corridors. Every turn felt wrong, as though the very walls were conspiring to keep them trapped. Mara's mind kept returning to the same thought. There was no escape. They were all going to die here, lost in the void. As they neared the heart of the station, a strange stillness washed over them. The whispers faded for a moment, replaced by an oppressive silence that hung in the air like a heavy shroud. It felt wrong, too quiet. The crew gathered near a large, circular chamber, the source of the station's power. It was massive, an open expanse of metal and shadows. At its center, the core pulsed with an unnatural, sickly glow. The artifact. It was there, sitting at the center of the core, its shape alien and incomprehensible. It thrummed with energy, a low hum that vibrated through the walls and into their bones. Mara's heart raced. This was it. This was the source of everything. The voices, the madness, the pull that had drawn them in. If they destroyed it, they might have a chance at surviving. But deep down, she knew that even if they destroyed the core, it would never truly be over. The station's influence would remain. It would haunt them, follow them, consume them in their dreams. And no one, no matter how hard they tried, would ever escape it. "Mara, we can still stop this," Dr. Ryan said, his voice urgent. "We have to destroy the core, now." Mara looked at him, her expression hardening. She saw the desperation in his eyes, the hope that had been kindled, even in the face of their impending doom. She saw the same fear in the other's eyes, the same fear she felt inside herself. They all wanted to live. They all wanted to escape, but Mara knew the truth. There was no escape. The whispers returned, louder this time, pushing at her mind, drowning her thoughts. Her partner's voice was the loudest. "You'll never escape what you've done," Adrian whispered, his tone filled with accusation. "You left me. You abandoned me. You can never run from that." Mara's heart ached, her chest tightening with guilt. She had chosen to save the crew instead of her partner. She had chosen to let him die, to leave him behind. She had thought it was the right decision. But now, in the face of the station's unrelenting power, she realized that it had never been a choice at all. It was fate. The station had already claimed them all, and nothing they did could change that. "Mara," Dr. Ryan's voice shook as he grabbed her arm, pulling her back toward the core. "We can't give up. We have to try." But Mara couldn't. She couldn't bear to fight anymore. She could feel it, the pull of the station, the suffocating weight of the voices that had haunted her for so long. She could feel Adrian's presence in her mind, his disappointment, his betrayal. It was as if the station had taken everything from her, the life she had known, the future she had fought for, and twisted it into something dark and alien. And then, in that moment, the decision was clear. There was only one way out. Mara turned to Dr. Rhine, her eyes filled with sorrow. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Before he could protest, she stepped forward, moving toward the artifact at the center of the core. The voices whispered louder now, urging her on, calling her to embrace the darkness that had consumed them all. She could feel the power of the station wrapping around her, pulling her into its grip. The artifact's light grew brighter, its hum vibrating through her chest. Mara's mind began to slip. The whispers faded into a single unified voice, one that carried the weight of every regret, every fear, every mistake she had ever made. "Welcome home, Mara," the voice whispered, soothing and cold. "You've come to join us. You've always belonged here." Tears filled her eyes as she reached out to touch the artifact. The moment her fingers brushed the surface, the station's power surged through her, overwhelming her senses. She felt herself being pulled into the core, into the very heart of the station. Her body felt weightless, as though she was no longer bound to the physical world. And then, the crew heard her voice one final time, coming through the comms, weak but clear. "There's no escape from the void." The transmission cut out, and the silence that followed was deafening. The crew stood in stunned silence, unable to comprehend what had just happened. Mara was gone. She had chosen to embrace the darkness, to become one with the station. And now, the station was theirs. They would never escape. The core continued to pulse, its power growing stronger. The voices echoed through the halls, calling to the crew, beckoning them toward the same fate Mara had chosen. The black horizon had claimed them all, and there was no escape.